One of the great philosophers of all time, Plato, once said, "Dictatorship naturally arises out of democracy, and the most aggravated form of tyranny and slavery out of the most extreme liberty." For the longest time, we were made to believe that the colonization of Africa was beneficial because Africans were barbarians that had no form of civilization. But because these European powers were great manipulators, many African rulers believed that they were being done right by them or were being simply tricked into signing treaties. I'm a Nigerian American that has spent her whole life in America. And at the age of 19, I was finally able to take a trip to Nigeria with my mother. This was during their presidential elections, and for the first time, I actually felt a culture shock. And this is because I realized how chaotic their political scene was. And this made me want to dig deep and think about the root of the problem. So, I would like to discuss how the colonization of Africa did more harm than good. For us to properly analyze these impacts, we must first look at the very beginning of colonization. Then we'll discuss the problems African nations went through post-independence, and lastly, how Africa is still currently picking up the pieces from the damage. Europeans had multiple reasons for world exploration, like spreading Christianity and discovering new lands. But at the top of the list was wealth. Europeans saw the abundance of natural resources Africa had and immediately saw how it could benefit their countries from an economic standpoint. Now, we know that these same European powers were the masterminds of the transatlantic slave trade that transported 10 to 12 million Africans to the Americas for human labor. But back in Africa, colonies were being established for economic gain for the mother countries. A not so great example of this was King Leopold of Belgium. He exploited Congo's resources like rubber and ivory, and at the expense of this was the lives of the inhabitants. Things like this went on for so long because many Africans were brainwashed into believing that what their colonizers was doing was good. They didn't see the exploitation because they were purposely being distracted. The people in charge of these colonies made the inhabitants feel like they were on the same level by giving menial positions fancy titles. So, for example, calling a mere servant that cooks, giving them the title of a chef made them feel, oh, I am like my colonizers. Others were given the opportunity to travel abroad and learn the ways of their colonizers. But not all assimilated though. Others used their newfound knowledge to break away from their mother countries. These colonies were finally liberated, but so they thought. These baby nations thought they knew everything there was about governing because they were told that democracy was about the people having a voice. But they didn't realize that it would be harder than it seemed due to the fact that their country's inception was just business deals and not actually trying to spread democracy. Many African nations fell into the hands of military power for the longest time, and they also had to deal with fraudulent elections. So, like their colonizers, many African political leaders only wanted to acquire wealth for themselves. Up to today, we can see how the Western world portrays Africa as a poverty-stricken continent despite all the development it has undergone in the last several years. And as an African myself, I always try to debunk that negative view. But as I began to put my pride aside, I began to believe the truth in it. Numerous political campaigns get filled with lies and empty promises just so that these leaders can hold government positions. And with these positions come access to government funds. Money meant for the development of the community gets shared amongst political leaders and the wealthy, leaving the impoverished to stay in poverty. And in the midst of this, the citizens lose focus on what is important because tribalism causes people to vote for leaders not because they agree with their political views, but because they come from the same tribe. So sadly, many Africans lose sense of how their government should function because many parts of Africa were not meant to be independent nations to begin with. They were cash cows. So when they were given their liberty, they did not know how to handle it.